Let's start a podcast about our mental health. For no good reason why, let's call it Mind Cake.
Hola, cakers, and welcome to another slice of Mind Cake.
Mind Cake.
With him,
Lee Crompton. And him,
Paul Bisson.
Paul Bisson, somewhere in... Where are you?
Birmingham, mate.
Are you in a travel lodge?
I am. Can you tell by the awesome decorations?
I can.
Yeah, it's just so generic, isn't it?
How many sharks in the park have there been lately?
In Birmingham, so we arrived on Friday and started on Saturday. So that's been 8, 9.
I'll edit all the workings out in your head out. It's fine.
Please. We've done 12 shows so far.
Just roughly, Paul. Doesn't have to be exact, just roughly.
Roughly 12.
Roughly 12. It's like as if you're doing this really complicated math sum.
I know.
12.
But
12, we've done 12.
I know, but I'm literally just not long in the door from doing two shows today. So my head is mince, pal. My head is mince.
Other than your mincy head, are you all right?
Yeah, I'm good. Tired, but good. Like, we're having fun. Shows are good. Kids are lovely. Can't be bad.
Yeah, we had a little chat off air.
A little one.
And I did insinuate that you were too old for this stuff.
Get too old for this shit, man.
In the words of Danny Glover.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah, my knee's goosed, my elbow doesn't work, my feet are sore, my back's wrecked. I'm not losing any weight.
My eyes are old and knackered. It reminds me of Monty Python.
Yeah. My knees are grizzled, yes.
Yes, what is it?
Crucifixion's a doddle.
Shall we?
Maybe edit that out.
What got the crucifixion's a doddle?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. This is a good segue, Paul. Well done. We are going to be talking about death.
Yes.
We finally got there. So it's been faux pas on many a front. So first of all, Paul. Oh, it gets better. You haven't heard the latest one, I don't think.
All right. Okay.
So Paul didn't have time to edit the episode that we thought we were going to put out, and I said, "Don't worry about that, because I've got another episode that I've already edited, which is this episode with the wonderful Dr. Richard Smith."
Yeah.
However, I'd forgotten that I'd scheduled a newsletter to go out on the Monday morning to say, look out for tomorrow's episode when it's Anne Widdecombe.
Yeah.
So then you had to put an apology to say, sorry, it's not going to be Anne Widdecombe and it's not going to be Tuesday. And then John Hannah, not that John Hannah, the other John Hannah.
Our John Hannah
pointed out, he says, oh, Anne Widdecombe's voice is sounding a bit deep, because I'd forgotten that to try and get ahead of the game, what I do is upload a file, because you can't start doing the show notes and doing all the bits and pieces and the thumbnail and everything until you've uploaded the file. So I just upload like a generic file. So I'd uploaded the raw footage of me and Arthur and Richard Smith. So firstly, that was wrong because it was the unedited version of me and Richard Smith with the thumbnail of Anne Widdecombe. Anyway, I managed to catch this at approximately 6:30 in the morning. So I think only John, because he listens early in the morning. And we can, it's fine. We don't need to say that out loud. We can just pass it off as an April Fool's joke because it was April the 1st.
God, that worked out well, didn't it? The timing was impeccable.
Ha ha ha! Fooled you.
Hey.
So just to reiterate, this is the episode with Dr. Richard Smith.
Yes.
As recommended by his brother, Arthur Smith.
That's right, yeah.
About the value of death. Hello, mind cakers, and welcome to another slice where this week we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Richard Smith about the value of death. Dr. Richard, how are you? Even though I've been
I'm
told
all
not,
right. I'm all
not,
right. Yeah. I mean, we just had a conversation about what a dangerous question "how are you" can be, because when people are awful, they don't want people asking them how they are. But I'm fine at the moment. I
good.
could give you a whole string of miseries in my life, but I won't. I'm fine.
Well, no, I think that's the thing is that how are you is just a cursory in a lot of instances, it's just a cursory. I'm not really very interested. I'm not saying we're not interested in how you are, Richard. Um, but it is a cursory as you're waiting for the kettle to boil at work. How are you? And your standard response is, but yeah, I'm all right, thanks, even though you could be terrible.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's
Um,
hard when you are terrible, though. That's the thing.
it is hard when you are terrible, yes, just to have that default response of, yeah, I'm fine.
And also, it feels a bit bogus if it's someone you know well and
Very
care
much
for.
so.
To say you're fine when you're not fine
Hmm.
seems betrayal almost.
Yes, yeah. For those people who don't know how our paths crossed, you are the brother of Arthur Smith,
Yep.
and he was on the podcast not so long ago, and he said, "Excuse me for the impression or impersonation. I don't know what the difference is. Oh, you should get my brother on the podcast. He's always talking about death. You can't shut him up about death." So I thought that would be an interesting topic to cover on
Yeah.
Mind
Well, I'm
Cake.
right into death, as my children say. You know, we've been here 2 minutes. We haven't mentioned death. What's wrong with you today?
Uh, so it could be classed as a morbid conversation piece, but we're here
No,
to
no. I mean,
explore.
I hope you realise, Lee, that we're all going to die.
Well, again, referring back to your brother's podcast, apparently not.
Yeah. Well, that's it's true. There's a lot of people. I mean, Elon Musk, he doesn't think he's going to die.
He's not going to die, but no, he did mention a person he'd interviewed
Yeah.
a while, and I can't think of the name of the society, but they were basically going to live forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said a lot of them are, the guy that he interviewed was in his 30s, and he's already as bold as a coot. And you think, well, if you're going to live forever, you've got a long time where you're just going to have no. But anyway, he said, I think they're all probably dead by now. So other than that cult who are going to live forever and Elon Musk, it's going to happen to us all. You're right.
Yeah, although it's true, there's a hell of a lot of people spending an enormous amount of money trying to find a kind of immortality. You know, it comes in various forms.
Yeah.
You know, you can have everything replaced a bit like you do with a car, so that although you're driving around, it's a completely different car from the one you started with. Or you can, nanotechnology will burrow out all the horrible things that are happening inside you. Or I suppose the most popular one these days is you simply download your brain. So
Yeah.
maybe your body doesn't exist, but your brain, carries on. What a ghastly thought.
Awful.
5,000 years from now, I'd still be wittering on.
Well, you could probably download my brain to a ZX Spectrum. I don't think you need any cutting edge technology for that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, that is again going back to a book that Arthur mentioned was the history of the world in I think 10.5 chapters.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
one of
the Julian Barnes.
the Julian Barnes book, and obviously one of the chapters is the guy who lives forever and just gets a bit. He said everyone basically chooses to die in the end because once you've done everything and seen everything and gone round and you get so good at golf that you've gone round St Andrews in like 18 shots that all gets a bit boring, really. So yeah, I think it's that payoff, isn't it, between if you're lucky enough to live 70, 80 years and it doesn't seem long enough, but at the same time, immortality is terrifying, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I always, I argue that death is healthy. It's
Mm,
healthy to die. It's unhealthy, or it would be unhealthy not to die,
hmm
which is sounds a bit odd to people. I mean, death is a fundamental part of life, and it's completely healthy to die,
hmm hmm
which seems odd to people. I think, unfortunately, it seems odd to doctors too, who tend to see death as a failure. We've got to keep going here, even if you're 85 and clapped out. And also, their doctors don't like to talk about it on the whole. So it's a lot easier for doctors to just give you another dose of chemotherapy or, give you another operation. It's easier for them
hmm
than having to sit down and say, maybe this is not the best thing to be doing here.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
find it hard. They call it the difficult conversation. And I think, ironically, with the growth of palliative care, which is the specialty that looks after dying people, a lot of the other doctors can sort of opt out and say, oh, well, we'll send you off to palliative care. They'll tell you what's going to happen. They don't have to actually have the conversation
have to deal
themselves.
with it. Yeah.
And they've almost sort of lost the skill of doing so.
Well, there you go. We wondered where this conversation was going to go, and I haven't even asked my first question yet. So it's all interesting stuff. My first question was going to be, what inspired you to co-chair the Lancet Commission on the value of death? And did any personal experiences shape your view of how we approach death and dying?
I mean, I've been interested in death ever since I was a medical student. I heard a guy speak called Ivan Illich, whose core argument was that modern medicine is the major threat to health in the world today. And in some ways, his argument was, death has existed as long as humanity has existed, that death, pain, suffering, these are part of life. And you have to find a way to deal with them. And mostly that's been through culture, it's been through religion. But then, argues Illich, along comes modern medicine and says, well, give us enough time, we can get rid of these things. You don't need to experience pain, you won't have to suffer, and give us enough time and you won't even have to die. And he talks about death is actually the last form of sort of consumer resistance. He was a great critic of industrial society. And that got me kind of interested in death. I don't know, I'd thought too much about it before that. And I've kept up that interest. And I suppose one of the things that got me into trouble was I wrote a piece, which I actually wrote in the BMJ, which I used to edit, the British Medical Journal, which we call the BMJ now. And I wrote a blog about how cancer is the best way to die. And I wrote it for an audience that wouldn't have found that so strange, lots of other doctors.
Yeah.
But somebody picked it up and put it on the Mail Online, I think, and suddenly it went voomf. Of everything I've ever written, this is the only thing that sort of reverberated around the whole world. And of course, you can imagine what readers of the Daily Mail thought of this argument. So there were 1,000 comments saying, who is this fucking idiot? I mean, what kind of doctor says that cancer is the best way to die? So it really kind of took off in a way that I'd never really expected to happen. So, I mean, there are sort of part of my argument, of course, you've got to die of something.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, most of the time we don't have a choice. But there are kind of 4 ways to die, essentially. So if we put suicide or assisted dying on one side, there are 4 ways to die. So one, and this is the commonest cause of death now, is the long, long, slow death from dementia or frailty. I mean, that's the commonest cause of death in women, and it will be in men soon. Then you've got kind of sudden death, bang, you're gone. A stroke, a heart attack, you were crushed by a meteorite or whatever. But that's not many deaths. That's probably less than 10% of deaths are like that. And then you've got the death from cancer, which used to be that you kind of went along and you got various bits of treatment, and then you went down over usually a few weeks. And then the other kind of death is from organ failure, whether it's heart failure, respiratory failure, kidney failure. And there you're on a sort of, you're dipping down all the time, but you keep having these real dips. So you get a sudden burst of heart failure, they treat you and you come back again. And you never quite know, when you're actually going to die. You go down, but you have these dips and then you recover again. So if that's the 4 options, I mean, I give talks to audience and I say, well, how do you want to die? Here are the 4 choices. What did you choose? And of course, most people opt for a sudden death. But I say, well, most of you are not going to die of a sudden death. And I also say, well, if you want to die of a sudden death, it's very important that you keep up all your relationships. All the people, because what you don't want to do is die. It may be all right for you, but it's not so great for the people left behind, especially if you've just had a blazing row.
You just had a Barney with the missus on your way to work, and then you end up in a car crash. So that, but I mean, actually, that in some way, that's a good lesson for all of us. Don't let
your relationships fester. Don't leave horrible things that you think, well, I ought to go and see him or her or do something, but you don't. So that's how most people opt to die. Very few people opt to die of, the long, slow death of frailty and dementia, which is probably how most of us are going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, quite a lot of doctors do opt to die from cancer because it's sort of, it's a manageable death. And in fact, the piece that inspired me to write this blog was by Louis Buñuel, the filmmaker, who talked about how he'd always, feared dying of cancer, but he had a friend who died of cancer. And of course, the time scale sort of works. You can talk and say goodbye and sort things out. You don't just suddenly disappear, or you're not fading away year after year. So quite a lot of doctors would opt for that, but it sort of shot me into the world of death, where I suppose I'd been for a long time. And then I came to do this commission with the Lancet. I mean, to be honest, I had a very drunken dinner with Richard Horton, who's the editor of the Lancet. He and I are chums. And when we were both sloshed and we told each other all sorts of things we shouldn't tell anybody, he said to me, Richard, he said, you must do a commission. You can do it on anything, but you must do one. And I thought, oh, well, he'll forget that. He won't remember it. But then, he did remember it. And so I had to come up with something, and I opted for death. And then it was his idea, because actually they were supposed to be doing a commission with the Vatican on the value of life.
Okay.
As he said, I saw him the other day, he said, at endless, wonderful dinners in the Vatican, tremendous, but nothing ever appeared.
Yeah.
Because, doing these commissions is hard work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he said, well, if we've got the value of life, let's have the value of death, because they go together.
Yeah,
and I think that's one of the arguments for the value of death, is that I think a consciousness of death enhances the value of life. I mean, maybe that's what happened to you, did it? I mean, you thought you were going to die. Here you are now. Maybe it's made you appreciate life more.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think it's very difficult for the outpouring from the Daily Mail readers, or just the public in general, about, if you'd have said to me the best in inverted commas way to go is by cancer, you'd have gone, well, that, and before I was diagnosed, you go, that's my worst nightmare, second worst nightmare, my worst nightmare, to be diagnosed with cancer. But then when you put it in the context of, right, well, would you rather sort of amble on with dementia for year after year, or would you rather get hit by a bus and, like you say, not have time to sort of wrap up loose ends, or maybe say things that you felt that you needed to say that but hadn't said? Then which does seem a very strange thing to say, but actually it's and yes, you're right in that. Part of the reason why we started this podcast was, to look at mental health, because I have, as I said a few times on here, you've looked inside Pandora's box and been faced with your own mortality, and then someone's closed the box and gone, "Oh, just forget about that and just go back to work as if none of that had happened." But of course, the majority of us don't face our own mortality, don't think about our own mortality, and why would we? Because it's, in a lot of instances, it's a morbid thought. Nobody wants to think about when or how they're going to die. But I don't really.
No, I think you do. I think you do. And recognizing that, life is transient, I think increases its value.
Oh, absolutely. No, I don't disagree with that. But I think the vast majority of people don't want to think about it.
Yeah. But so I think they're wrong. Famously in Bhutan, which is, they have this happiness score, and supposedly Bhutan is one of the happiest places in the world.
Yeah.
Everybody in Bhutan is urged to think about death 5 times a day.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This won't go on forever. Let's value every second while we can.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I always think, of course, without death, every birth would be a tragedy. We've got to give way to the others. And, death is what underpins evolution. I mean, without death, we probably have almost no art. Humor, writing, music. To some extent, they're all, trying to sort of look into the face of mortality and say, well, here I am. I won't be here forever,
Mhm.
but I'm doing what I can while I'm here. I think,
Yeah.
we've, and of course, death was pretty familiar. I mean, we live in a strange world now. Where unless you're a medical student or something, you probably never see a dead body till you're in your 40s or whatever. And
Mhm.
in fact, often you don't even see the dead body now. People are whisked off. Death has become kind of hidden and mysterious. It wasn't like that until, I suppose, so probably since the last sort of 50, 60 years, it's become like that. I mean, before that, death was very familiar. I
Yeah.
mean, and poor people, the main thing they did was to make sure that they got a good burial, so they pay, a penny a week into a funeral fund.
Mhm.
I mean, we're the unusual ones in a sense that we've sort of lost our familiarity with death, and that I think makes it scarier.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think about it, you encounter it, you meet people who are dying. I mean, if you talk to most palliative care physicians, I mean, you might think, well, they'll be the most miserable people on earth, spending all day, every day hanging out with the dying. But you'll find they're very cheerful, positive people. And hospices, which you might think, whoa. I mean, I live just around the corner from a rather lovely hospice that has a Georgian building, and they turned some of it into flats. And I was quite keen to move there. But my wife said, well, I don't want to live in a hospice. I mean, that's ridiculous. But actually, I mean, what better place to live? It's such a lovely building. And when your time comes, you just roll down the corridor and there you are. So it's I mean, it's we make a mistake, I think. I mean, you're absolutely right. Most people don't want to talk about it. And as you were saying, when people thought you were dying, suddenly all look the other way because
What do you say to
they
that
don't want
guy?
to encounter it. They don't feel comfortable about it themselves.
No.
But now, I mean, you've been right there. You've looked death in the face in a way that I haven't done, I have to say.
Mhm.
So, I mean, has that made you, when you meet with people who are dying or grieving or suffering in one way, does it make it easier for you
Yeah,
to
it does make
be
it a
with
lot
the
easier for
person?
me. I think, pre-diagnosis, I would have been one of those people who go, "Oh God, it's the cancer guy." What on earth? Because you go, "Are you all right?" You can't really have that conversation. So I think I'd have been one of those people because it is difficult. What do you
Yeah,
what do you say to that? But I think having gone through it, and we did an episode with, what does it look like to show up for someone? And I think having been through that process, then I find that I am far more empathetic and far more, I know a few people close to me who have been diagnosed with cancer in the last kind of 6, 12 months. And well, first of all, they kind of seek you out because they know that you've been there and got the t-shirt.
yeah, yeah,
And secondly, I feel more at ease to talk about it because, yeah, like you say, I've had that life experience, and you do hear about a lot of people who have had a similar experience, whether that be, they nearly died in a car crash or have had cancer and come through it, that it does give them a completely different, yeah, perspective on life.
yeah. Because I
And
think people also tend to think that, dying is going to be awful. It's going to be
Mm,
really miserable. But, there are so many examples of people talking really, actually dying. I mean, I think this is not so great if you're 13 or something, although ironically, I think children often handle death better than adults.
mm,
But if you're, 75, 80, I mean, I'm 72, a lot of people, it's not a miserable experience. It's a rather special experience. You've got that little time, you're dying, you're not quite sure when, but it's coming to an end. And actually, it can famously enhance life. And there are various examples. I've suddenly forgotten the name of the famous guy, the playwright who wrote Pennies from Heaven. Dennis Potter. I've
Dennis
remembered
Hop.
it.
Dennis. Oh, see, I had Dennis Hopper in my brain, and I'm thinking, no, it's not him. Dennis Potter, not Hopper.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever seen the famous interview he did with Melvin Bragg, where he sort of sat there smoking and drinking Brompton's cocktail, which is, got morphine and things in it,
I don't know. I've
and
seen that.
talked about how, well, you should really watch it. It's a wonderful thing. It talked about how the line that everybody remembers is that the cherry blossom was at its blossomest. He'd never seen cherry blossom look so beautiful or so intense.
Uh-huh.
And Clive James, he wrote a lot of poetry. I mean, he took a long time to die. I think it got a bit embarrassing. And that's actually one of the problems now with cancer. So the way I described cancer when I wrote that piece about you bang along and you go down pretty quickly. I mean, now with all the treatments that are available, it actually can become a bit like dying from dementia. It goes on for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And you never quite know, when it's going to come. And that can create a weird feeling.
Mm-hmm. But no, I think you're right in that. Whilst it's been a blessing and a curse, I think it's has messed with my mental health to a degree. However, I can't help but think you wish that more people had that experience. Yeah, again, I don't want that taken out of context. I do not wish what I went through on anybody. But in terms of then outlook on life. So for example, when I'm picking up on something you said there, I've got a friend called Rachel who kept in contact with me whilst I was diagnosed, and I always message her now whenever I see the first snowdrop and whenever of the season and whenever I see the first daffodil of the season. And it's little things like that. You go, I've done another year. And some people might go, I've made another New Year. I've made another Christmas. Whenever I see a snowdrop, it always reminds me of Rachel. And you think, yep, that's another year. And it's like little things like that you appreciate. And obviously seeing my kids, little one was, I say was 8 months old when she was diagnosed, when I was diagnosed. And she was 5 on Friday. And I think all birthdays are special, but it's that, even though there was 20 odd kids there and they're running around this bouncy castle, it was absolute mayhem, and you just got to stand there and just smile because you're like, this is what it's all about. So yeah, I do appreciate things more. At the same time, I think, again, I've said this a few times on the podcast, there are still those moments where can't DM and make the most of life. However, I can guarantee that on Saturday morning at 8:15, I'll be yelling at the kids to just get your shoes on because we're going to be late for gymnastics again. Every week, girls, every week. So
it doesn't turn you into
back.
A perfect person or even necessarily a better person, but I think it gives you, it allows you to do things, understand things, think things that perhaps otherwise you wouldn't. It doesn't, it doesn't mean that suddenly you become a pillar of tolerance and virtue.
That hasn't happened for me. I can guarantee that hasn't happened for me. But no, it does give you a different. And I think the world would be a much different place if we did value our mortality far more than just pushing it to the back of our brains and going, well, that's not for me. That's that's not something I need to worry about or think about.
But there are these days I mean, some people say that death is the new black. Death's sort of fashionable in some ways. I mean, I've been accused of that. And there are death cafes, where people go along and talk about their experiences of death or their experiences of grief and talk about what might come. And I mean, did you remember there was a death festival at the South Bank, which went on for 3 days? I went for every minute of it. It was fantastic. It was a big risk. The what's her name, Jude something, who was the director of the South Bank. I think she talked about this at the beginning. She'd had a stillbirth. She lived in a street where other people had stillbirths and deaths, and nobody seemed to know what to do or how to talk about it. And she thought, well, why don't we all get together and find a place where we can talk about death and dying? And so she organized this 3-day festival. It was all day long, 3 days. There were concerts, there were plays, there were debates. It was fantastic. And I mean, of course, they thought, well, maybe no one will turn up. Who wants to go to a death festival? And when I said to people, I'm going to a death festival tomorrow, people would sort of giggle. They didn't quite know how to respond. But it was packed. You had to queue for half an hour to get into a seminar on suicide, and there was someone talking about graves. And I remember so vividly a fantastic one-man play describing the whole process of taking his ex-wife to Dignitas in Switzerland, to be given an assisted death. And it was very funny, very poignant. I mean, he just stood there on the stage, there was no props or anything, and yet
Yeah.
you absolutely felt you were there in the clinic, as she was being injected. It was and there was a concert. It's one of the things they had was an exhibition of Ghanaian coffins.
Right.
So these are coffins that they will make. They'll make it like a guitar or a Cadillac.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
have you ever seen them? They're
Yeah.
fantastic.
Now you mentioned it, I think I have seen like a YouTube clip or something of all these. Yeah. 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 So you get like a
I mean, the
bespoke.
commonest one, is a cocoa bean, because of course Ghana, is
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
the cocoa comes from, and a lot of it's a bit like going back to the womb being buried in a cocoa
Cocoa
bean.
bean. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and they're beautiful. I mean, it seems a bit of a shame really to burn them or bury
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Well, that was going to
So it
bring.
was,
I was going to skip a few. No, I'm not going to skip a few questions. I'm going to stick in order because otherwise we'll get lost. One of the conclusions to the report is that death has become too medicalized.
yeah.
And I know you said earlier you think that was probably what 50, 60 years ago. Do you think that's when that kind of
Well, it
happened?
wasn't so medicalized then. That's the point. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
become medicalized now. So, it's almost as if death belongs to health professionals. More than half of people die in hospital, although most people, if you ask them where they would like to die, say, I'd rather die at home.
Hmm.
But actually, most people don't. Not many people die in hospices. And a lot of people now, of course, die in care homes.
Yeah.
I mean, they are in some ways the new hospices. Well, I think to some extent because of death's kind of false promise that it could deal with these things,
Mm.
but also because medicine has come to see death as a failure, which I don't think was the case. Death was inevitable. It was doctors. In fact, the whole idea that doctors should try to extend life never existed until Francis Bacon and the 17th century, 16th century.
Mm.
It felt that's God's business when we die. It's nothing to do with doctors, and that
Yeah.
to some extent it would be going against God to try and prolong life. But then the idea that one of the things that doctors do is prolong life became commoner, and doctors have come to see death as a failure. And as a consequence, there's a terrible tendency to go on far too long, too many treatments, too many operations,
Yeah.
giving antibiotics to people, hours before they die. And unfortunately, a lot of people die without even realizing they're dying because no one's ever sort of spelt it out to them. And because they're not so familiar with death, they're kind of perplexed. And families are suddenly horrified that, their dad has died when it never crossed their mind that was about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's become, I mean, ultimately, death is not a medical event. It's a family event. It's a community event. It's a cultural event. It's a religious event for many people. Shouldn't be a medical event, which is not to say, doctors and nurses are going to have nothing to do with death or dying. Of course they are. But they've got to, so what we would like to do is see it shifted back much more to families and communities. And to some extent, of course, that is what happens, because if you're dying, most of the time you're with your family, you're with your carers, you're with your friends, you're not with health professionals, perhaps until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways it's recognizing what's already happening, but the emphasis tends to be on the medical. And I mean, of course, you've got to, you're not dying until a doctor says you're dying. Whereas it didn't have to be like that. You could just die in the old days. You didn't have to wait around for a doctor to tell you were dying. Yeah, and there are. I mean, we write quite a lot in our commission about Kerala in South India, where, in a way, death belongs to the community. So there are lots of people who, go and talk to people who are dying, help them out. Doctors and nurses have a role, but it's a much smaller role, and it's an example. And there are these things here in Britain and other places called compassionate communities.
Okay.
Where people kind of, recognize that death is going to come and support people who are dying, talk to them, talk to each other. So death does become more familiar. So it's not as if what we're advocating is completely bizarre and extraordinary. It already exists in many places. But I think there is a tendency, especially after COVID, that was the ultimate medicalized death.
Yeah.
You know, dying in intensive care, your family couldn't be with you. You're surrounded by nurses and doctors who are gowned up. You can't see their faces. You know, someone holds an iPad in front of you, and that's how you say goodbye to
Yeah.
your wife or your husband. I mean, that's the kind of death that horrified
Mm.
Illich, you know, Ivan Illich, who I was talking about earlier. And I think it horrified a lot of people. I mean, certainly health professionals know, I know, so, well, I'm not having that. You know, that's just no way to die. I mean, I'd much rather, you know, I'll take the risk of getting COVID. You know, I need to be in there with you know, my dad or my wife or my husband when they die.
Absolutely. And I was talking about Kerala. I've actually been to Kerala. And I remember when I was out
Yeah.
in India, I don't know if it was in Kerala, but there are certain places in India where they have these towers of silence.
Yeah.
Um, for those who don't know, that they basically put they put their, I think, is it Buddhist belief?
No, it's party. It's Zoroastrians.
That's
Um,
right. Yes.
yeah.
They put their dead on the tops of these towers,
Yeah.
basically to recycle them, for want of a better expression, with the vultures have them, and it's all part of the sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
to coin a phrase from The Lion King, the circle of life.
Yeah, but you know they've run into problems because unfortunately, you know, a lot of the bodies they put up there are full of chemotherapeutic drugs
Mm.
and antibiotics, and it's killing the vultures
Is that right?
because they eat these bodies, and you know, it doesn't do them any good. So they're
Mm.
having to. I mean, Bombay is a place where that happened a lot, but it's you know, there's just not enough vultures around anymore. A
Really?
bit like in you know, in Venice, the way what happens there is you get buried but then they dig you up again because they haven't got enough space, you know, so they put you in an ossuary with your bones. But they've got a problem too because you know the worms can't cope with all these antibiotics and toxic drugs. So
Wow.
bodies are not rotting as fast as they used to.
Well, again,
So
I think I've rolled this out as a statistic, was that, and again, I don't know how much credence there is. It could be an urban myth, but the decomposition rate of a Western body that has been pumped full of, drugs and preservatives, and that we eat in our food all the time. I'm gonna pull a figure out my ass. I've got a feeling it was like 7 times, or
yeah,
sorry, a body in, say, India, or an Eastern country was decomposing 7 times quicker than a Western body, purely because of the amount of
yeah,
preservatives and stuff, all the crap that we eat in
yeah,
our food.
yeah. I mean, I don't know the exact figure. What I do know though is that you know composting
Yeah.
of bodies is coming in. I mean, I'd like to be composted. And uh, you know, I think it was it because people were against cremation at one time, and then various sort of prominent people spoke, maybe even Queen Victoria spoke out in favor of it, and it began to happen. And I have the idea that I wrote about this, that King Charles ought to have himself composted because it's a very good way to die for the environment. It's legal in lots of states in the US. I
Is
mean,
it?
what you do, you get a big box it's slightly warmed up and you put
Mate.
the body in with wood chip and various other things. I mean, I don't know the complete formula. And evidently, you know, within weeks or certainly a few months, you get back, you know, soil that you can plant carrots in and things. It sounds
Wow.
to me a wonderful way, you know, as opposed to if you burn somebody, you put a
Yeah, yeah,
lot
yeah.
of carbon into the atmosphere.
Hmm.
And of course, we haven't got enough ground to kind of bury everybody. Although, you know, you can bury yourself, you know, or not bury yourself, but you can bury your dad or your mum. You can sort of take them off in a wheelbarrow and find a place and dig a hole
Are
and
you
stick
allowed
them
to
in.
do that?
I think that's right. Well,
That
I
doesn't
mean,
sound right to me.
well, no, I
You
think
could
it's
just
right. I
dig a
mean, I
hole
think
somewhere and.
you've got to certify them dead. But if you've got a plot,
Oh yeah, no, I mean, bury them alive is definitely a no-no. But
oh yeah,
I think if it's, I don't think that's right that you can just dig a hole somewhere and bury someone, is
Well,
it?
we should. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, let's say that if there are any listeners to this podcast, they shouldn't try it themselves,
Don't
but
don't try burying yourself.
check
That's
it out. Check it out before
yeah.
you start burying your dad. But no, I've got a friend who's a nurse. I mean, she wrote a wonderful piece about how they took somebody's dad, took him in a wheelbarrow up somewhere, dug a hole, stuck him in. Seemed to go well.
I suppose that's yeah, I mean, I suppose that's one thing. If they died at home, I don't want to make light of this. I'm kind of smiling as I'm thinking about it. I write dark comedy. You see, I'm trying to get into. I work in construction, but I write dark comedy scripts, and
Yeah,
it's given me an idea. If somebody died at home, it's one thing putting them in a wheelbarrow or like bury them in the back garden. It's another thing if they've died in hospital
yeah.
and
You
you've
have to
taken
spring them out.
if the porter could bring them down to the reception area and then transport them into the wheelbarrow and then maybe wheelbarrow them to the car, then get them into the. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a logistical nightmare.
Well, of course, they've got to wheel them down to the mortuary, so it's not so different wheeling them down to your car. I mean, you could park your car just at the back of the mortuary
Have a
and
special
bingo, you're
car
there.
park.
You know, that's one of the things, kind of one of the weird ways that deaths happen in hospital. Suddenly they sort of draw the curtains round, and you know
Mm,
how ineffective those curtains are at actually hiding anything. You can see through cracks and you can hear everything.
yeah.
And they load the body into a kind of crate and wheel it off, and hope that just nobody notices. But
Mm.
it's doesn't really make sense. It's all part of the trying to sort of hide death away.
Oh, I just thought of an idea, a business idea that I might float to. Who's the guy who runs Amazon?
Oh yeah, Bezos, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, he could maybe do an arm where you got like if you did it Prime, you could get it delivered next day, next day delivery to your door. Then you wouldn't have to worry about the whole wheelbarrow,
Yeah,
getting them in the
yeah,
car thing. Just get them just an Amazon parcel.
yeah, yeah.
Mind you, the box,
Because
everything you get delivered from Amazon is always in a box. It's about 10 times bigger than the actual
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
So that's the only bad thing is you would end up with a box the size of a bungalow.
yeah. I mean, presumably you can buy a coffin on Amazon. I suppose you can. There must be a wide range of, I don't know.
I'm writing down notes as we this is because I bookend this with Paul. So we
Because
talk about
it's a very profitable business undertaking. Because when you turn up and the undertaker says, well, what sort of coffin do you fancy? You surely want something rather magnificent, in
mm,
honor of your mum or whatever, and you presumably want a lot of flowers, and why not a few horses and a nice open cask, and you think, oh my God, I gotta go the whole hog because I love
mm,
my mum so much. So people spend far too much on funerals. Although you see how it's now becoming quite fashionable to have, no funeral at all, like David Bowie.
yeah,
One day you're there, then suddenly you've disappeared.
yeah,
You're just sort of taken off, because they can cremate you at sort of 8 o'clock in the morning. Whereas
mm,
if you want to have a funeral, you've got to have it.
yeah,
Well, that's it. And, my brother's good on funerals. He does, as a comedian, as someone who's used to standing up in front of an audience and getting a few laughs,
mhm.
you get a sideline doing funerals because increasingly people are not religious, and it
Yeah.
feels a bit fake having a vicar. So you need someone, and why not a stand-up comedian?
Oh, has he
It's
done a few
ideal.
funerals? Has he?
Yeah, yeah. I've done one myself as well as a celebrant, you're called,
Hmm.
because I rather enjoyed it. The bit that made me nervous was pressing the button, for the coffin to go off because
Yeah.
the man said to me, "Be sure you press it hard and keep your finger down." And I was sort of worried that,
The
oh
pressure.
dear.
Yeah. So would you be composted, do you think? Is that the way
Yeah,
you'd
yeah, yeah. No, I'd like to be. I mean, at the moment, I've got written in my will that I'll be, what's it called? Alkaline hydrolysis,
right?
which is the most sort of environmentally friendly way of getting rid of you at the moment. They sort of dissolve you and come back as a sort of bit like a glass of water. But composting would be better, and
Mm.
it costs about $8,000, so it's quite expensive. But of course, once the industry gets going, the price will come
Yeah.
down perhaps. And you get back a lovely bag of soil at the end.
Well, I've got a composting bin in the back garden. Could I just go in there?
No, I think you.
You can have
I
specialist
think
worms and bits of.
yeah, specialist worms.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't quite know the formula. I mean,
But again, if I've had radioactive iodine treatment, I don't know whether I want the worms. I could decimate the Scottish worm population with some of the drugs that I've had. I mean, it's a minefield, isn't it, really?
yeah,
So
because
if you were composted, would you still want sort of a little service, or would you somebody say a few words, or would you literally just put in the compost
yeah, no,
bin?
I think that. I mean, it sounds a bit egotistical, doesn't it? But I mean, I think there's a place for funerals. I mean,
Mm.
by definition, the funerals are not for the people who are dead.
No.
They're for the people who are left. It's part of, because I mean, all these rituals around death. I mean, that's another thing we've lost in a way. The way that you'd be given the last rites and all the. I mean, there's a wonderful book by someone called Kevin Toulis about my father's wake. He's from rural Ireland,
Yeah.
where they knew about death, and people turn up as the person's dying and sort of chat and such like. And then when the person dies, the wake, which can go on for days as
Yeah.
people sort of drink and talk about the person who's died. The bit that surprised me was a bit in the book about how a lot of teenagers, would come along to the wake because the wake went on all night, whereas the dance hall closed.
Right.
So after they'd been to the dance hall, they'd go to the wake, and of course, sex and death go together. I mean, there's nothing like death for making you feel a little kind of randy, for want of a better
Why
word.
is that?
Yeah, well, again, I think it's
That's probably a whole other
you're
podcast.
suddenly reminded of your own mortality.
Mm.
Could be gone soon. I mean, maybe it's something even evolutionary in the sense, oh, I better get out and reproduce because that's
Could be.
that's
Yeah.
what we're here for, the
Mm.
selfish gene. I mean, once we're here, we reproduce, and then we're of no use to anybody. And if you haven't reproduced, maybe the thought of death prompts that, or maybe it's just, whoa.
Maybe if you've already got four kids, then you're less likely to be randy if somebody dies.
Yes, well, you could try and experiment and find out, I suppose. I
There's a
don't know
whole
whether
new
any
paper.
sociologist has
There's a
looked at
whole
that.
new paper to be done there.
Yeah, PhD probably.
PhD. One thing I was going to ask was grief and the community. The report emphasizes the value of communal grieving. And so the question I was going to ask, which we've already talked about, was, the role of community in death as opposed to the
Yeah,
medical profession. But I guess I didn't know if you had any views on, let's take Princess Diana, when we have this
yes,
outpouring of grief.
yes, yes,
Why do you think that is? Because, like you say, well, for me, huge Prince fan, big Bowie fan. Again, you have this sense of loss, even
yeah.
though I've never, anyway, taken Diana to the extreme, because I mean that was a huge outpouring of emotion, and I wonder whether that's because as a society we generally suppress these things, then it just splurges out. Or yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer in any scientific terms, but I mean, I remember when John Lennon died.
Hmm.
That was the day that I kind of grew old, really. It sticks vividly in my mind. I suppose that was the first death that really kind of hit me.
Yeah.
And I think you're probably right in what you speculate that, a lot of the time we don't think about death and then boom, there. I mean, I suppose especially with Diana, who was so beautiful and
Mm.
somehow was, the people's princess, and people could relate to her, and they felt, she's been done down by all those old stuffy old royals. I
Hmm.
mean, people really identified, I think, with her vulnerability and the way she died, I suppose, as well. It just because it was wild, wasn't it?
It
When you
was.
remember, I didn't go up to Kensington Gardens, but there were miles and miles of flowers. It was a very extraordinary time.
Mm.
There have been other episodes. I think when Queen Charlotte died, I think it's particularly because she was young. I mean, I don't think it
Mm.
would have been quite the
Mm.
same if she was married. It wasn't really the same when the Queen died, was it? There wasn't. I mean, all those people queued up. to see, to go past the coffin.
Rather than Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby.
Yeah, Yes, well, what happened to them? I mean, they came a bit unstuck, didn't they? Maybe that was, because they were so wicked on that occasion. Whereas what David Beckham queued for 14 hours or something,
Yeah.
didn't he? I mean, to show his respect. Did you queue? Were you there? I mean, and then of course she was in St. Giles, wasn't she?
Yes, she was in
Yes,
St. Giles. No, I didn't. I didn't queue. I was actually for the Queen. That was obviously. I was actually on holiday in Greece when
Yeah.
the stuff with Diana came through. And I remember thinking it was a sick practical joke by some, because it was some like, I think it was some German tourists or some, because it must have happened overnight. So we
Yeah,
woke up to it like
yeah, that's right.
in sunny Greece, and people go, "Oh, Princess Diana's died." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So yeah, I remember where I was, but no, I didn't feel the need
Yeah, you
to.
see, I remember where I was too. In fact, I remember waking up because actually I was flying to South Korea that day, and I woke up and instead of it was a Sunday, I think, wasn't it? And they were
Mm.
playing the Lark Ascending, the Vaughan Williams piece on the radio, and I thought that's a bit odd. Why is that happening? I don't know what kind of person could have that impact now.
I suppose my first of a celebrity kind of, I say celebrity, was Kurt Cobain when I was at
Oh
school.
yes, oh yeah, yeah.
There were, yeah, that was,
He killed himself as well, didn't he?
you did, yeah, yes, okay.
Interestingly, we haven't talked about assisted dying, which is,
Well,
what
no,
everybody's talking
that's at
about at
the,
the moment. And
yeah,
and
that's,
actually we stayed away from that to some extent because I think, that's sucking all the energy out of talking about death. And I mean, it's I think it's good in some ways that we're having this great debate, but I mean, probably, I mean, we will have assisted dying sooner or later. It's bound to come, and even the
mm,
people who are against it kind of recognize that. But what form it will take and when it will come is not quite so clear. But it'll only be probably 5-6% of deaths. The
yeah,
majority of people, it won't make that much difference. Although I think a lot of the very fact it's a possibility is helpful to a lot of people. Think, well, if I can't stand this anymore, there is a way out.
yeah,
So it can be helpful even if you don't actually have an assisted death. But I think it somehow you hear MPs on the radio saying there's quite a lot of people dying badly at the moment. If we had assisted dying, that would fix all that. But that's not true at all. It's only going to be about a comparatively small number of people. And ironically, I mean, if you look at the Canadian experience, it's mostly very well-to-do people, well-educated people,
mhm.
people who are used to having control over their lives, which many people don't feel.
Yeah. I guess the comparisons I can draw is that what you wouldn't want is, speaking out loud, I have thought when I had the second operation, which was going to make the end less grisly, I didn't know. And they said you've got 4 to 6 months. So 6 months was going to be a positive outcome. How much
Yeah,
of that 4 months was I going to be how much of that 6 months was I going to be compos mentis? And how much was I going to be in palliative care? And
yeah,
it had occurred to me that, well, if I just drove my car into this tree and didn't hurt anybody else, I don't really
yeah,
want my family to see me and my kids, their overriding memory of me being in a hospital bed connected to tubes and
yeah,
whatever. And I guess what the thing that you don't want to fall into is going, if I, and I'm not saying I would have taken the option, but there could be, if you've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given 6 months to live, that you could go, well, I don't want that palliative care, I don't want that grisly end. I'll take the assisted dying, please. And then 5 years later, I'm still here.
yeah, yeah. There's
So
a there's a famous article that was written by an oncologist, a cancer doctor and an ethicist about, why I want to die at 75. Because he said, 70, I'm 72, I'll be 73 in March. It's not a bad age to die because the chances are you're doing okay. You're not a complete wreck. Whereas if you go on to 95, the chances are you will be. You'll either be mentally doolally or you'll be, physically really incapacitated. And one of the things that Ike Manuel argues in this article is, I don't really want people to, as you just said, to remember me like that. I'd rather remember me as kind of sprightly and, able to do things and not completely doolally. So he advocates, when you get to 75, you should stop having all preventative treatment, no colonoscopy as they do in the US, and my brother says, well, what you ought to do is take up smoking, speed it up a bit.
Are we gonna? I didn't realize we were gonna have a competition of who can do the best Arthur Smith impression. I think you've got a distinct advantage.
I once was in a pub and the woman sitting next to me said, "Are you Arthur Smith's brother?"
Really?
And, yeah, just because of the voice. And he used to make a lot of money out of doing voiceovers. And I always felt like I'd come along and say, well, look, I'll do it for 20%.
Undercut him.
Because our mother used to, she didn't like the fact that we had Cockney accents. And so she'd have us saying, the rain in Spain stays mainly on the plain and 30,000 feathers around a thrush's throat. And I always think it's pretty good that she was fairly unsuccessful with my brother because it's become his sort of trademark.
Absolutely.
The modern Sid James.
Yeah.
Whereas, I haven't got quite, it's not, I suppose the world I live in, there aren't many sort of doctors with Cockney accents. Maybe there are more now, but there certainly weren't. So you sort of try to be a bit more refined.
And you've certainly taken the different directions in life, haven't you?
Yeah, although, we see each other every few weeks. We live close to each other, and we still have a certain competitiveness between us, which is kind of odd after all these years. But we did, yes. I mean, we've gone kind of different ways.
Well, again, yes and no. I mean, I think there's, like you say, I think there's a lot of, without wanting to put sort of, there's a lot of comedy, I think, in death. And I think tragedy and comedy aren't really, both just different sides of the same coin, aren't they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, as the Greeks recognized.
Mm-hmm. Well, Richard, that has been a fascinating chat. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I wonder if anybody anywhere wants to listen to it, but I enjoyed doing it, whether they do or not. So
absolutely. Thanks. If it resonates with a few folk and makes them think about things in a maybe slightly different light, then we have done our job.
Anyway, Lee Crompton.
That's me.
What were your thoughts on said podcast that we've just listened to?
Well, I thought it was jollier than I'd anticipated. Obviously, I knew I was going to speak to Dr. Richard.
Yes.
I thought this is going to be a bit
bleak.
But I think there's a lot of positives. I think I came away thinking about things a little bit differently, and if nothing else, it's given me an idea for a screenplay. Since I've spoken to him, I've actually outlined an idea. I have Googled it. And you can, as long as you have the land users or the landowner's permission, you can bury people in your back garden or in wherever the land is.
Wow. Food for thought.
It is food for thought. And as I said, you'd have to deliver them from the morgue. So as long as you could get them from the morgue or the mortuary to your house, you'd have to fit them in the back of the car or whatever.
Mate, I get rugs in the back of my car all the time. That'd be no bother.
Yeah. It's similar, I guess. Not very bendy once they're rolled up.
Exactly. Quite heavy. Smell nice.
It has given me... Sorry?
Said they smell nice as well.
You're definitely a rug sniffer. I'm not even editing that out.
Oh, no.
So, yes, it was very... I don't know if entertaining is the right word. And I did hear on the radio today that, there is a bill that's coming up soon or coming closer to fruition about assisted dying. And, I think it's a hot topic, but Dr. Richard thinks it's not long till it's coming.
There's a validity in Dr. Richard's point, though, about, death should be more...
in the hands of the community.
Yeah. Yeah, like like people should be more, just aware of it. It should be spoken about more. It shouldn't be sort of what's that?
Taboo.
Taboo, yes. And it ties in with, again, whenever we interview people, there seems to be so much crossover, even though people come from such varied backgrounds and do different stuff. And this again ties in with Benny Vonkin, whose episode hasn't come out yet.
Benny Stoicism, as I like to call him.
Yes, Benny the Stoic.
Yeah.
And he talks in that interview, which will be coming soon, about memento mori, which is that kind of view of not being afraid of death and treating death as an inevitability, and it's not something to be feared or a taboo subject. And yeah.
You say it's coming soon, Paul, but I think that's one of the ones you've got to edit, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So watch this space.
Sometime before Christmas. And I've decided that I would like to be composted, I think.
That would be up to you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think, I'll look I will genuinely look into it. Eco-friendly. You could, you could, like ashes, you just scattered, you're just anywhere then, aren't you?
Just blowing in the wind.
Literally blowing in the wind.
Yeah.
If you're buried, then you're kind of, taking up space, aren't you?
Yeah.
So why not be composted, and then you could stick me in a pot and plant a tree or something?
Yeah. Do you know, last week I went with my mum to the funeral directors to basically arrange what's going to happen with her. So it was kind of a bleak morning, whatever it was. It has to be done. It has to be organised. And her way of thinking is, well, if we get it organised now, when the time comes, you won't have to worry about it. It's already taken care of, And she just wants no ceremony, no pomp. She goes, if you want to get everybody together afterwards and have a party or go for a meal or something like that, that's up to you. But she goes, for an actual funeral, don't want one. So basically, it's like the most basic kind of package that you can get. So like, she will be cremated and the ashes will be sent to the closest funeral director to where I live. And then I can decide what to do with them, basically.
Wow.
So there'll be no ceremony, there'll be no cars, there'll be no wake, there'll be nothing like that. And then we'll probably just have a celebration of her life that I'll organise. We'll go to the pub or something,
Is there nobody else that could organise it, Paul?
What do you mean?
Well, no, I just mean, if I was going to put the organisation of my funeral into the hands of somebody, I don't think you'd be near the top of my list.
No, and I think that's exactly why my mum's done what she has done.
Yeah. Has she got no other options? You've got a brother, haven't you?
A half-brother, yeah, so he's not technically my mum's.
Oh, I see, right. Well, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Your poor mum. She's got to rely on you.
Yeah.
Well, it all starts to make sense now. She's gone, he will make a complete Horlicks of this. I might as well just sort it out when I'm still alive. And then all he has to do is pick up, if he can remember, pick up the ashes.
That's the one job.
He's got one job from the nearest crematorium.
Yeah.
Made it nice and simple for you. And then she'll sit there, bless her, wherever it happens to be, for probably a good few years before you decide what you're actually going to do with her, if anything.
Probably. So, I mean, she knows me very well.
Clearly.
So I think
we've established that already just in this conversation.
So she's just gone, do you know what? I'll do it myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you, Paul's mum. I hear you. Whereas I'm going to get, if we just, between now and whenever that my date is up, my expiry date is up, I'm going to collect, you know those compostable bags that you get from the co-op?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you need a few to fit me in, but just stick me in some of them, I think, and put me in the garden. I don't know.
Stick you in the brown bin.
No, I don't think you can do that.
No.
I think that might be against the law, putting them in.
There's laws against just putting human remains in the bin, I think, isn't there?
I think so, but surprisingly, going full circle, surprisingly, I think you can put them in your garden.
Yeah. I know it's not the same, but my mum's got her cat, like the ashes, in a pot in the garden. So there's like a little evergreen tree that's
Like
now
that.
part cat.
Yeah. If you think, whatever your belief system is, but you're part of that, I don't know, what would it be? Nutrients?
It's like the Lion King. Your bones return to the dust, and then the antelope eat the grass, and then the lions eat the antelope, and then their bodies become the grass. It's a great circle of life.
Do a poo. Dung beetles eat the poo. Yeah, that's not quite the same.
Do they eat poo, or do you just shovel it around and turn it into little boulders and roll it, don't they? Do they actually eat it?
Oh, no, I'm getting confused with children.
Yeah, children eat poo. Yeah.
Okay. Seeing as though you're in the travel lodge and you've probably got a limited Wi-Fi, do you want to just crack on with the housekeeping?
Oh, pieces housekeeping. Oh, how very lovely.
If you would like to email us, you can email us at sliceofmindcake@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at mindcakepod. Or is it Mindcake Podcast?
Who knows?
I always forget. Like and subscribe and give us a wee review and all that nonsense.
All that shite.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to do your thing now about this? Because you were going to do a little video as well about, does anyone want any free stickers?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those of you that saw our little video where we were apologizing for getting everything wrong this week, there was also an error in that video in which I forgot to mention something. So I will do it now. Was it last episode or 2 episodes ago?
Who knows?
Who knows? Whenever it was, Lee mentioned the possibility of getting some Mind Cake stickers made and posting them out to people who could then like stick them up around your area, so to speak, to advertise.
Not on your person.
Not on your person, like where you live, your local area. To kind of just
responsibly.
Yeah, like the KLF did recently when their music was re-released. Stickers of their logo started appearing just randomly in cities around the country. So in the spirit of the KLF, if anybody out there wants to get some stickers and go rogue and do a bit of advertising for us, please let us know either via Insta or email.
Or Callum, just let me know at work.
Yeah, if you happen to work with Lee, which 50% of our listeners do, just grab him by the water.
Easier. Just leave a post-it on my desk.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I was going to try and wrap it up in, you're all part of the Mind Cake tribe, and we're all in this together, and it's good to feel part of something, and we're all trying to, promote good mental health or whatever. But basically, it's just free advertising. If we could get people to do sort of free advertising for us.
Yeah, but it's also good for your mental health because you'll have to go out for a walk, get some fresh air,
get your steps up.
Get your steps up, yeah. You'll have to think logically about where you put the stickers. So it's a problem-solving activity. It gets the brain working.
Strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're doing a service here, mate, I think.
And you're welcome.
Everybody.
Yeah. Should I talk briefly about my retreat? Because I did having said I'm not going to do social media, I felt the need to do a couple of posts from my retreat.
Which was awesome. I did try to ask you about that in the intro, but I think the Wi-Fi went weird and you didn't hear me. So it would be good if you could mention that now. Okay.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. I knocked out a play. Never written a play before, but Mr. Paul Beeson has. And he gave me a copy of his play, one of his many plays. So I've kind of just copied that format. I copied that. Put it into ChatGPT, asked it to change a few words.
Now it's much better.
And it's got my name on it. And so now I Mind Matters. So it is a dark comedy based on this very strange therapy that's made its way from America.
Ooh.
And so I'm going to now try and that's now gone to my script editor, who is going to have a read through, and this weekend, I think. And then we're going to try and get it into theatres, which is very exciting.
Very exciting.
Mm.
And Lee knocked this play out in, what, a day and a half?
Yes.
Give or take.
Give or take. Yes, Gemma rolled her eyes. And I was, I'm just going to write this weekend. Of course you are. You're just going to go to a cabin at Shepherd's Hut in the Highlands, overlooking Ben Nevis, and just having never written one before, and just I was going to say knock one out in a weekend, but that I don't need a weekend for that.
No.
Write a play in a weekend.
And you did.
And I did. But no, it was fabulous. I stopped off at Fort William on the way for some reflexology.
Oh, did you know?
To get me in the Zen mode.
Lovely.
And yeah. But there was no distraction. I think that was the key. There was no distractions. There was no telly. There was nothing else. There was no tidying to do, or just little jobs around the house to do that I could just pontificate for. I knew what the plan was. I knew who the characters were. I knew what the story was. It was just a case of writing it. So, bosh.
And
done.
Bosh indeed. And you had to get into your loo.
Yeah.
A little secret bookcase door, which was amazing.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was
the butterfly book, wasn't it? That was your handle.
Yeah. Which was a good job she pointed that out. Otherwise, I could have got caught short. I did leave the door open at night time because I thought if I am caught short in the middle of the night, I do not want to be fumbling around which book was it to open the door when I'm desperate for a pee-pee. So, but yes, there was a secret door which was built into a bookcase, which had a door as a handle, and also there was a lot of sort of music related themes. So there was a trumpet and a trombone above each of the beds, and they'd been made into lights. So there was a light bulb concealed in like the horn. Would it be?
I think. Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know the bit I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the blowy end, the other end.
The other end, the noisy end.
The noisy end. And then they told me that I told me that as if they do it just for me. They obviously do it for everybody. There is a bottle of whiskey somewhere concealed within the shepherd's hut. And if you found it, you could just drink it.
Did you find it?
Oh, of course I did, yeah.
Yeah. You just ripped the hut to shreds. There
was a violin on a hinge, and behind the violin was this bottle of Jura.
Nice.
So yeah, basically sat there, wood burning stove, drank whiskey, and knocked out a play. Perfect.
I will give you a round of applause. Now I'm holding my iPad in one hand, so I'll applaud like this.
Right. When I was at school and you were slapping your forehead like that, I used to call that, and I've no idea why, an Auntie Betty.
An Auntie Betty?
Auntie Betty! Like that.
Oh.
Maybe edit that out because it's not good for a podcast of just us slapping our heads.
This fapping noise in the microphone.
Well, I'll say might actually sound like something else if it does pick it up. Anyway, enough of that.
Speaking of knocking one out.
Enough of that. We have had a message from Sarah Dean. So I don't know whether we need to play the emails.
That's up to you because you're editing this one.
Oh yeah, we can class it as an email even though it's a message.
Emails
from Sarah Dean. If you remember Sarah Dean's, I went to school with and is in Australia. You're nodding.
That's the
remember,
one.
Friend of the show, Sarah Dean.
Yep.
To me, she's still Sarah Hearn. Hello, Sarah.
Yes. Yeah.
Just answering your question about box of cables.
Cables?
My husband has boxes and boxes of them, and when asked to get rid of or sort through them, he says that we might need them. Valid point.
Yes.
Mr. Dean. I can't say I've ever seen him use any of the said cables and have only watched in despair from afar as it grows bigger and bigger. Presumably she means the cable box still.
I hope so.
And watch other just as useful objects get added to the collection, such as plugs, screws, nails, wall plugs, and drill bits. I feel that this is a national problem for all men. Lee, you are not alone. Thank you, Sarah. I do feel vindicated.
Good. And, thanks for getting in touch. It's nice for us to receive a message.
Yeah. Where are you going, Paul? Look at the toilet. Are you? He's on the move, listeners. He is on the move. Where are you going?
I'm not going to go to the toilet.
You were going to get the toilet, weren't you?
No, I was. I'll tell you what I was going to do. I was going to turn the shower on so it would be ready for when the podcast was over.
Oh, right. You need to go then. Right. I think that's Paul telling us that it's time for us to go.
Yeah. I'm trying to be subtle, but then I remembered that you could see everything I was doing.
I can see everything, yeah. It's on the camera, yeah. How long does the shower take to warm up in a travel lodge then, that you have to put it on?
It warms up pretty quickly, but it just means that I can dive straight in,
Right. You're still clothed?
Oh, I'll take my clothes off, obviously.
You can do that now as well as you want.
No.
I need to turn your camera
not until you stop recording.
You might get more listeners or watchers.
Well, yes. Well, I suppose. Let's not start.
Or maybe lose the few that we've got.
Well, exactly. We've got to hang on to what we've got, Lee. We can't risk losing any listeners.
That is the gamble. Okay, my friend. Well, you go and have your shower. Thanks as always for listening, and apologies for the lateness for this going out on a Thursday. But he's been sharking in the park, and you've
been writing in the Highlands,
knocking one out in the Highlands. So kind of everything, can you?
There's an image. Right. See you later.
Bye.
Let's start a podcast about our mental health for no good reason why. Let's call it Pint Cake.
What are you eating?
Toast. I've rolled it up into like a little
pitta pocket.
You've got a pitta pocket or two.
There's a reference for the kids.
Yeah.
Do you know I was Fagin when I was in primary 6?
What were you faking?
Fagin.
I can't even stick that on the end, can I?
Oh, you can't. No, it's a can of worms, mate. Maybe edit it out just to be on the safe side.
Okay.